Here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you want to just check in using the chat, if you would all just sort of say yes, if you can see and hear me, we're going to begin this session. Thank you for joining us. And then Mirabella, you can track that if you would, please. This is our fourth meeting that we have done in consecutive months, focusing on marriage counseling. And we'll be reviewing some of the content from the other sessions. I'll be presenting new content as it relates to today's topics, and then we'll have time for questions or an explanation of what we plan to do as we move forward. I have some allergies, and so I'm going to put a cough drop in my mouth because as I talk, I tend to cough. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to open with a short prayer. Lord, we're grateful for technology, the ability to speak with friends around the world simultaneously in a group like this, quite amazing. And I pray that you use this time productively for us, ourselves, our homes, and our ministries. So we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So as we, okay, this doesn't want us, here we go. So let's start with a brief discussion, if you will, as to why Christians marry. So it is conceptually possible to have a culture of Christians who are motivated differently than other people to marry, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. There's usually a desire to be in love, falling in love, which is first driven by attraction, which is largely the eros, or the lustful component that causes people to come together. Many people have a vision of raising children, their protege, in a Christian home, so they want a Christian marriage. It's obedient to God's word. If you're going to pair up and have a relationship, that you marry. And many of us, I expected to one day marry, have children, create a Christian home. And so these are some of the reasons that we consider why marry, why do Christians marry? And then the last is, in some cultures, for both men and women, it's just viewed as you're not a completed person until you have a partner. So there may be some other reasons why Christians marry, and I can see it. So if you want to, if you have a reaction to other things that cause Christians to marry, feel to post a chat, if you would. But I had an interesting presentation I listened to just a couple weeks ago. And it just made me think a little differently about the whole concept of and motive for Christians to marry. So this is John Kelly, and he was speaking, and he was kind of joking, and he said, my niece wanted me to marry her, and so we looked at the vows, and I said, I don't want to have anything to do with that. That love, honor, and cherish stuff sounds like I'll put up with you no matter what. And he was kind of being in tongue-in-cheek, but he wanted to make this point. So he shared that he wants them, in this case it was a niece and nephew, but to marry in order to stand firm against all of the attacks of Satan as a married unit. So united in a mission to change the culture, united in a mission to be united in Christ in all things, which is a very different focus as to why we should marry. And so that just got me thinking as to how could we implant this kind of vision in either young adults or people remarrying. We're not just marrying because we want something or someone. We're marrying because we want to serve God in a united fashion. And I think that kind of motivation would really impact the whole concept of divorce or selfishness and that sort of thing. I just thought that was interesting. Thought I'd share that with y'all as we move forward today. But getting back to what do we do in a session? And so here's where we'll kind of talk through some things to refresh your memory. We've already had 3 sessions, and we've covered all the content that we'll review just now. And I still start the session the same way. I have an agenda for today's discussion, but first of all, catch me up. How have you guys been doing? And in that catch-up, I will make sure that we also talk about the specific elements that we've been teaching all this time. So they may volunteer we've been doing romance builders, we've been practicing Eve, or they may for a while just talk about life circumstances. Maybe something's happened in their life. So we kind of do that. I am always modeling good listening skills. I'm echoing, I'm validating, I'm empathizing. And when I'm instructing and getting them to talk to each other, I'm reinforcing the same. I want them to use the active listening tools that we've taught: echo, validate, empathy. So if they don't mention it, I'll ask them, how have you been doing with romance builders? Have you been doing the I feel loved and cared about when you ... give me 12 things, pick two, do them every day for your spouse? Have you been doing that? What impact is it having? And by this time, that should be a pretty regular thing. They're getting used to just looking forward to and making nice gifts to each other in that way. Are you maintaining time for your relationship? Do you have a date, whatever fashion that shape that takes? And then are you limiting conflict? Are you calling time out? And that refers back to the anger expression scale that we worked on in the very first session. I asked them if they're praying for each other, specifically, bless my spouse, show me how to bless my spouse. I asked them about problem solving. And so all this, I'm obviously running through bullet by bullet, but there may be a few minutes here and there as we talk about, they did a brainstorm around a particular problem. I asked, how did it go? And was it helpful to use this particular format? And so on. And then the general theme of are you thinking well of each other? Going back to Philippians 4, do you think about the excellence, the purity of your relationship, those things worthy of praise? Because we know that if we approach everything in life with gratitude, including our marriage, we'll have a better attitude, we'll be much more willing to participate in it, the whole thing goes much better. So this probably, by the fourth session, this could be a 10, 15-minute discussion, getting all this stuff kind of out and talked about, or longer, depending on how much time you're taking. In a 90-minute session, this could be a half hour of talking about these things. Again, I mostly work in 45 to 60-minute sessions. When I do intensives, I'll do as long as 2 hours a session. So it kind of varies from context to context. Outpatient counseling, where people doing once a week, I rarely do just 4 sessions. In intensive environments or in a coaching context with a little longer time frame, I'm often doing just 4 sessions as we apply these particular principles in the sequence that I've laid out here. I still follow the sequence. If I'm doing a year of therapy, I still go through all these elements, go back through, reinforce certain things. So these really are the core of most of what we do. So we review the homework, and then we move into today's topic. And I don't necessarily give this lecture to them, this little chunk that I'm giving to you, but I wanted to elaborate on this concept of landmines. Landmines are those things that blow up when we approach them. They can be in any room in the house. They could be in our checkbook. They could be in our bedroom. They could be when we go visit in-laws, relatives. They could be holidays. But significant damage is done when we approach a landmine foolishly. And so the first thing we do back in session 1 is we mark the landmine, we put a flag on it, and we stay away from it. During problem-solving work, like brainstorm, we may skirt around it, or we may actually eliminate some by solving problems. But now we're going to talk about, so what do we do when there are these things that are so destructive? What do we do with them? And so that's what this last piece is about here. And so landmines come from our own background. We are humans. We were raised by humans. They were imperfect. We live in a world that is affected by evil and Satan, and so people have hard times. And memory is so powerful. We remember hurts and slights, even when we don't really remember. We have emotional memory. We have the capacity to not be consciously aware of things that we're reacting to. And all this stuff Satan can use in the flesh to get us to stumble and fail. But God wants to redeem all this, and he wants it to actually be used for our growth and wisdom. And so along that line, I do talk directly with couples that God wants to redeem this situation. He's redeemed you. He wants a marriage of redemption and grace and forgiveness and growth and ultimately ministry. And so this faith that God can use all things gives us the courage to talk about things that have been bad and hurtful and harmful. The goal is to if we're going to talk about something from the past that has been harmful, that we come up with a different outcome. That we don't just kind of wade through the same old emotions and end up in a bad place. We actually come out with insight. So Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, which many call the love chapter. It talks about love a lot. And here he's predominantly probably talking about his perception of God and his relationship with God. But the context, I still think, applies to us as humans as we relate to each other as well. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. It's also translated, I put away childish things. And my Greek scholars tell me that the verb tense of put away or put the ways of behind is a very active verb. It's not a one-time thing. So it's a continuing to put away these childish things. So God allows us to go through experiences that cause landmines, I think, for purpose. And so this is also part of what gets woven into the discussion with the couple, off and on a little bit. And then I have my own stories to tell as well. I know that wisdom can come from difficult circumstances. I know that understanding why I respond in the flesh so severely can help me to bring those thoughts and behaviors into alignment with God's purposes. And in the end, we have a great story to tell. If I've been through difficult things, I'm victorious on the other side. It's a great story to share with other people. And I believe that when we can teach a married couple to be agents of health and healing, then they really are able, in the context and the privacy and intimacy of their own relationship, to bless each other with extensions of God's grace, forgiveness, and healing. And so these tools are critical to have not just a relatively peaceful marriage, but a very dynamic marriage, intimate and life-giving. And I also believe that as our confidence in our marriage grows as we go through difficult things, that the word test, if you just look at an English dictionary and look it up, it can be to prove something, to examine something, or to purify something. And I think going through the fires of life do both. Along the lines of that which does not kill me makes me stronger, which is a phrase you all have heard at some point or other. And so how to heal from these things, it has to be in a relational context. This is not something that God intends for us to be able to do by ourselves. So it isn't a matter of reading a book and then being better. The story has to be told, and certain emotions have to be reactivated in the telling, but it has to remain a safe environment. So one of the most powerful things that counselors and anybody who does counseling, pastors, teachers, coaches, is simply provide a safe presence to hear the story. And in just doing that, not being judgmental, not being alarmed, ashamed, validating the value of the person. So the being present and listening is very, very powerful. What that allows the person to do, so if I'm telling a story about something that hurt me 10 years ago, well, I'm 10 years older now. I'm wiser, I'm older, I have a different mindset. And as I tell my own story, it changes in my perspective. I can realize that I've overcome this, that I survived it, that good has come out of it. But the ultimate test is, does it change my behavior? And I use behavior very broadly. Does it change my thinking? Does it change the way I express my emotions? Does it bring a greater spiritual maturity, behavioral maturity in the learning? So is insight and wisdom actually acquired through this process? So there almost always have to be disciplines that come into place. So it's the telling the story, gaining new insight, and then changing one's life and purpose with God's help. And in a really healthy marriage, this can take place between the two. They can encourage one another to love and good works while they hear each other, while they adjust and become a healthier place to live. And I've helped many, many couples work through this. So back to the actual session. So that little bit that I've covered in the last 7 minutes may or may not be talked about expressly with a couple, but is part of my thinking and is part of what's taking place behind the scenes as we work through. When I'm working with couples of leadership role or capacity, I talk to them directly about these things, hoping to influence their capacity to lead others down healthy paths. So we will actually talk about the reasons and the whys and so forth with this stuff. But what I have before you now is an outline I call it the search for safety. It's an acronym. And it simply describes a very powerful sequence that takes place pretty routinely if the context is right. So this is really just a descriptive of what will happen if the listener, and if I'm in my professional role, I am the listener, I'm the counselor. In a marriage, we choose one or the other. If a listener is really playing the role of the excellent listener, does not get defensive, does not get judgmental, does not get argumentative, this is what we see happen all the time. And so the sequence is simply the safe place is to put the listener, this is about the listener puts him or herself in a mental, spiritual, relational place that is safe. And I've had people do this different ways. My approach is very simple. I'm 60 years old. I've been studying the principles and practices of counseling and psychotherapy all of my adult life. I tell myself, come on, Paul, you're a therapist. You know how to do this. And I put on my metaphorical therapist hat, which brings years of experience to bear in doing this. Other people have different life experience. They do different things. There was a television program that was very, very popular in America a few years ago, still has people that follow it, called Star Trek. And in this television program, a spaceship was traveling the universe and would encounter alien beings that would try to destroy it. And one of its defenses was a force field shield that would go up. That same force field has been used in many science fiction, fantasy kinds of things. So I'll have a Star Trek fan, and I'll ask, so how will you put yourself in a safe place? And he'll say, well, I'm on the good ship Enterprise. I just put up the force fields. I can see in here, but the lasers can't get me. So they're using an imagery kind of approach. Another person will pray and just pray for the Lord's presence and calm themselves and stay present in a safe place. I was kind of tickled with this. I had a little tiny woman. She was like 5'2", very, very petite, and she had a husband that was like 6'4". And so I said, what are you doing to put yourself in a safe place? She says, well, I see a 9-foot Jesus standing behind me with his hands on my shoulders, protecting me. He had to be bigger than her husband, I think. So 9-foot Jesus. But we put ourselves in this safe place where we have disciplined ourselves to be able to stay and not be triggered or reactive ourselves. Because here's the problem with landmines. You're sharing something of emotional impact. Could be fear, could be anger. I react to it. You react to my reaction, and it just escalates and blows up. Whereas if one of us can remain calm and just let the other person express emotion, it doesn't escalate. In fact, we eventually both go to calm, which is the third point, affect change. But after I'm in a safe place, of the Eve dialogue, echo, validate, empathy, the listener simply uses empathy. And when we're in a safe place, we invite the speaker to share. So if this was related to my wife being angry with me, I would calm myself and I would say, tell me about your anger. Tell me how you feel. We just invite them to communicate, and we stay entirely in the empathic listener mode through this whole exercise, all the way to the end. So what will come out is whatever the emotional message is, and I emphasize emotional message. Going back to Eve, we echo in a factual message to start with. We empathize in an emotional message, and this is all about emotion. So we invite the emotional message. The person may say, I was angry with this, or I was hurt when that, but it's always negative. That's why we have this safety structure. So the person shares their feeling, and then the third point, the affect change. Affect is a term that we use for emotion. I needed an A to have an acronym. It's the basis for affection or feeling expression. So the affect changes very quickly. This is when we're doing this in my office, when my wife and I are doing this, this is no more than 25 minutes at the outside going through this sequence here. So the person, and I'll tell an illustrative story in just a minute. The person expresses negative emotion, and since there's no pushback, there's no defense, it's heard, it's understood. There's just an empathic statement. All the listener does is, that made you angry, that hurt you, you were really frustrated. Just these empathic statements simply in response to what's being shared. And so the energy comes out of the anger, and then we see what's underneath. That's the affect change. Now, if the person goes to calm, C-A-L-M, Then we can jump all the way down to help, which I'll describe in a minute. But if it is a landmine issue, there's always something under the surface. And so what will come out may be known to both, may be surprising, but it will help us understand the depth of the emotional reaction. So just to recap, I put myself in a safe place. I invite you to share. I simply respond with empathy. Your emotion changes. It either goes to calm, or it may go to sad, or it may go to vulnerable. This whole process will create the reframe. And I apologize for this being so dry. The story will illustrate all this in just a minute. The reframe is just a different perspective. I will learn something from this. It will change my view. It'll put this in a different frame. So the person goes either to calm or to sadness. Then it's reasonable to provide comfort. It's very common to actually, after this anger is dissipated, to want to reach out, hold a hand, touch, put an arm around. And we keep inviting the story, though, whatever the feelings are, whatever the story is, until the person genuinely goes to calm, and then we go to help. And help is to ask for three things. How can I help? And by that time, both parties are calm, and it actually becomes a problem-solving thing. How can I help you? I've been listening to your story. I'm motivated. Let me help. Let me tell you a story to illustrate this. And it's a fairly common kind of occurrence. I'm going to intentionally tell you a dramatic story that some of you may have heard if you've heard me speak before on this topic. So I think I'll not choose the most obvious one. I'm going to choose this one. So there was a man and a woman, and they've been having a lot of conflict over time and being on time, and she was in individual therapy, and he was in individual therapy, and they were coming together for a marital work, and they were familiar with this concept, and so she was angry, and so he went into a safe place, and he was calm, and what I do when I'm guiding couples through this is I'm coaching. I will interrupt if someone's not able to listen. In fact, I've had things so intense that I have sort of taken over for the husband. I think I'll share this story with you. Let me remember to do that. Where the husband lost his capacity to empathize, but the wife was in such a deep state we needed to hear it out. So I think I'll share that one after this one. But this is the way, more typical how it runs. He's able to get calm and stay safe with my help, and she begins telling a story. And at first she's angry, and the anger is you're always late when you pick me up after Wednesday night service and choir practice. Their church had a Wednesday night service followed by a choir practice, and he would come and pick her up, and apparently he was at least sometimes late. You have to remember, when you're getting the emotional measured, it may be exaggerated, so you're always late when you come pick me up at choir practice. And then very quickly, and he just calmly said that really frustrates you, that hurts your feelings. He appropriately responded with empathy, and then the affect change came immediately, as it often does, so right from anger to sadness. And tears began coming down her cheeks almost immediately. And we're inviting them to just touch a part of their heart that has been maybe not paid attention to in a while. And she said, she was very spontaneous with it. She said, yes. Sometimes I feel like I did when I was a little girl. And then here out comes the story that provides the reframe. When I was a little girl, my mother was an alcoholic. She was often late. In fact, she sometimes forgot me. And it was so shameful to be at Girl Scouts, and my mother doesn't show up, and this person takes me home, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to explain what's going on. And this happened over and over. I felt unimportant. I felt worthless. And she just begins really sobbing and kind of regressing into that little girl state. Why didn't my mother love me? Why didn't my mother love me? And so she cries there for a few minutes. He, meanwhile, he provides the comfort. He comes in and puts his arm around her, and she actually cries on his shoulder for a minute, which is a very dramatic shift when you're experiencing this yourself or watching this, to see someone move from an angry posture, eyes locked onto just a wanting comfort posture. So I'm hearing some noise. Someone may have a microphone on, and if you could just mute it, like some movement of some type in the background. So if you could just mute your microphone, that would be helpful. Um, yeah, I'm hearing some talking and some papers moving and stuff. So that's, yeah, if you could just mute your microphone, that would be useful. Mirabella, could you just mute everybody for a minute? Or do I have to do that?
You have to do it. Can you hear me? I can't. I'm trying. I'm working with her right now. I was with her on the phone trying to help her to do it.
Got
She
it.
just did it. Okay, or
Got
you
it.
did it. Yeah,
I
I
just did
can't.
it. We're good.
Okay.
Thanks. So I apologize for the interruption. Okay, I was telling a story. Okay, he's got his arm around her. He's comforting her. And she fairly quickly wipes her eyes and sits up and takes an adult posture. All of this transpires in just a few minutes. She expresses her anger. She goes to sadness because we've created a safe place for this to happen, just to simply express the heart. She goes to sadness. She tells the story. She gets calm. Her husband now is highly motivated to be of help. He has gained an insight. He may have known some of the story historically, but it all comes together so that he can see how his negligence didn't cause the initial harm, but his negligence keeps this reacting in her life, this reenactment of this pain. And so he wants to help her. So he says, how can I help? And so I turn to her and I say, I want 3 ways that your husband can help. You want 3 things. And I'm going to ask him to choose one. So she says, I want you to be on time. If you tell me you're going to pick me up, be on time. And I say, okay, give me another one. She pauses and thinks, and she says, well, we could drive separate cars. That's a possibility. We could drive separate cars. And then the third one was, if you're going to be late, call and tell me so I at least can plan for that. So she preferred the first one, obviously. That was her first choice. You be on time when you tell me. So, but now things are very calm. They're both calm adults. She has made 3 requests. I turn to him and say, I want you to please choose one and be sure you do it, because this is all about trustworthiness. So whatever you choose, make sure it's something you can do. And he says, I honestly think the best thing would be for us to drive separate cars. I'm disorganized, but if we could eliminate this, at least this particular instance, by driving separate cars, I think we should do that. And she accepted that. She said, okay, that's what we'll do. We'll drive separate cars. So this provides the listener an opportunity to honestly, not just promise anything, but honestly think, okay, what is most likely to be of help here, and to give it. And so the couple moves from a point of contention and defensiveness, and this had been going on a long time, sequential arguing, to now collaborating to problem solve and move forward. That eliminated that particular problem for them. But beyond that is someone heard me. He gets it. He can see some of my vulnerability, and he's willing to respond. So the person feels more loved and accepted by the husband and cherished by the husband just through doing this. Now, if he would fail to follow through repeatedly again, it would nullify, it would erase any of the gains made in the work that they'd done in this particular area. But he wisely chose a simple solution so they didn't have to reenact that story every Wednesday night after choir practice. And they went on to do some other work also that helped improve these situations. So that's one example of taking people through a safe place. The listener stays with empathy through the whole thing. Emotions change just because they're not being argued against or defended against. The story keeps coming. You get a reframe. It almost always, if it's a landmine issue, almost always moves to sadness and sorrow and loss. You provide comfort. They calm down. 3 things to help. That's it. Works great. Now, every now and then, something different happens. But I've done hundreds of these that have gone just like this, with many stories just as dramatic. But I have had occasion where both parties weren't able to remain in a safe place. And so a couple comes to mind. He is a Vietnam War vet, and she has a background of pretty significant neglect and abuse. And so when in Vietnam, he experienced some terrible things and had post-traumatic stress disorder. She as a child, had experienced some terrible things and had some more minor signs still of the same condition. So you have 2 people with lots of landmines, lots of triggers, lots of emotional sensitivity, and even though they were mature in years, they'd been married for 35 years when I saw them, they still had a lot to learn in terms of how to manage these things. So we had an occasion, and there are multiple problems. This is a typical case where a pastor would want help from a licensed therapist in our culture to help work with this. Um, so they're very active in church. They're Christians. They're good people. But I can't remember what started it, but we set up the stage for him to listen to her, and for her to share some of her uh, just unhappiness with something that wasn't a big deal on the surface. But as soon as we started, this was the first time I'd done this with this couple, she moved from anger to tears, and he froze. And it was clear to me that he was in what we call a dissociative state, and something was going on with him. And so I had two people in the room who'd been triggered and were incapable of helping each other. And I now had to deal with both of them at once. So you just have to make choices. I chose to stay with her as the therapeutic focus, and with him, I said, that's okay. You just sit back. You do what you can to take care of yourself for a few minutes while I work with your wife. And then I essentially took his role and walked her through the safe place, empathic expression. And we got some usefulness out of it, at least in terms of her understanding what was going on. Now, it wasn't particularly curative for the two of them. These themes we had to work on for a long time. But after I finished with her, I had to turn to him, and he was still in a he'd kind of calmed down. And so as his defenses came back together, he said to me, I cannot do that again. I cannot experience that stuff. And then he kind of quickly described how there are times when stuff from Vietnam comes back. And I figured it out just watching them. He couldn't respond to tears. Something had happened in his life where crying people, something terrible had happened. And so every time she cried, he couldn't engage with her. So that created a serious problem with being able to help each other, which actually took 2 years to work through. So I decided to give you a complex one, not to alarm you or to believe this it may be too hard, but I actually want it to be reassuring. All things can be managed, with care, with understanding, with good relationships. So that was a story where as soon as she began to cry, it triggered him, and he did not have the capacity to deal with it, and I just had to kind of take over and work with them both, one after the other. Just to let you know, subsequently, see, he was afraid of his past, but after 2 more years of work, so you can see how long some of this takes. I now have him seeing a therapist who he gets along with really well, and is an expert in a technique called EMDR, which stands for eye movement restructuring, eye movement desensitization restructuring, and he's making great progress with that. She also is doing individual work, and they just needed a lot more individual work so that they could come together and do this stuff. And that's just a discernment that we have to make sometimes. Sometimes I will say to people, you're not ready to do this particular thing. We need to do this, and then we'll bring it together. So I just wanted to present some reality, for you all. I don't know what populations you'll end up working with, what people have been through, but there's a relationship between the more repetitive, worst case life experiences, and the more fragile people are, and the more brittle are their defenses, the harder it is for them to not get out of a defensive state. And so there are 2 stories there. I've got a bunch more that could be shared. But what I want to move on to is I usually just do this in the office. I don't tell people to do this at home because they're not ready. But after I see that they can pretty much do this and I don't have to intervene, then I know they have the basic skill set of being able to be empathic and in a safe place, which is really the basic skill set to do this. And then couples will be sharing in the session. I will not be a witness to. They will tell me about some of the wonderful healing experiences they've had with each other as this goes along, if they're sophisticated enough to be able to get to that place. So the search for safety almost always flows exactly the way I described it if the listener is able to stay in a safe place. And my work as a counselor is really helping that person stay there. And then, and like I said in that one story, which has only happened a couple times, if that person can't, I'm just become the counselor to everybody. But in all the hundreds of times I've done this, that is really rare. That is really rare. So then what we do, and what do we do with this? The point is, how do you develop the capacity to be that good listener, to actually hear someone expressing their frustration with you and not get defensive? And so we practice this 90 safety days regimen. And this is life-changing, what I'm about to share with you. 100% of the couples that do this, 100%, I'd never have had a couple not be substantially changed by what I'm about to tell you. But I can only get about 30% to do it and stick with it. And that has to do with motivation, that has to do with distraction, that has to do with capacity to schedule oneself, a lot of things. So what I'm saying is it's going to sound very simple as I describe it to you, but it really requires some effort to do it. So we divide up the days into who is the good listener. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the husband is the good listener. During those days, he doesn't complain to his wife. He doesn't say anything negative to his wife. He doesn't criticize his wife. He remains available to listen to her, and she has the freedom to express what she feels. Now, we do encourage people, don't be mean. Don't use this as an opportunity to hurt. I have had to redirect couples where we've taught this stuff, and they come back the next week and he says, "Oh man, did I dump on her when it was her day to listen?" That's not the purpose here. So now I give that caveat. We still want to have grace and peace and goodness expressed, and so you don't want to be mean to each other. But the husband listens Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the wife Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and it's a simple discipline of training yourself to be the good listener. My wife Becky and I did this in 1989. It's been a lot of years ago. We took 90 days, and we divided it up just like this. And that had a big impact on our relationship. We had a good relationship. We had gone to a recent, we were 14 years of marriage in at that time. We had gone to or maybe 12 years, we'd gone to a seminar and had learned some things, and one of them was a variation of this. And so we decided to practice it. Becky is a very expressive, spontaneously expressive, emotional person. Her personality is that she processes things with her emotions. I'm more of a thinker, and that affects nuances of how this works. So I found it very easy, honestly, to just stick with it. Monday morning, I'd wake up, okay, it's Monday. I'm the listener. I don't complain. I don't fuss. I don't whine. I will prepare myself when I come back from work and we re-engage. And that's what I would do. We were living a very traditional American lifestyle back there, middle class. I went to work. She stayed home with the kids. So when I was driving home, I began the discipline of asking myself, okay, it's Monday. I'm the listener. I don't know what she's been going through. I don't know what kind of situation I'll be walking into, but I will be the good listener. I'll prepare myself. And I did real well with that. Tuesday, I would say to myself, okay, it's my day to speak. I don't have to focus necessarily on the listener, and if I want to share something, I can. Now, Becky, on the other hand, just being a more emotionally spontaneous person, she was willing, but she would forget. So there would be the occasional Tuesday where she'd come to me and she'd have a kind of complaint, and I would try to be nice and gentle and kind, but I would say pretty clearly, it's not your day. And she would just kind of, she'd pull it together and comply with it. But I just wanted to tell you that it isn't always easy for people to do this, and it isn't always the same within a couple as far as the ease of doing it. I, on the other hand, discovered, well, once I've sort of kept my tongue for a day, most of what I have isn't worth sharing. It kind of goes away. It evaporates. But I realized after a while, I need to also exercise the discipline of speaking up so that she practices being the good listener. And so I made a point, not every day, but when it was my day to speak, so that we practice this exercise, and it went both ways. Again, she's much more spontaneous with her emotional expression. She is an external processor. She actually thinks things while she talks. I'm an internal processor. I like to kind of pull back and deal with my own thoughts. So So we were trying to seek some kind of balance so that we worked this for 90 days. At the end of 90 days, we stopped paying attention to whose day it was, and it had a big impact. Becky experienced my presence and my I'm a pretty good arguer, so for me just to receive her was very healthy and good for her, and I believe it had a positive impact on a general kind of anxiety. I believe she was calmer. I believe she was more peaceful, and our home clearly was more peaceful as we exercised this, and we've picked it up twice at least. I think a year later, we were kind of falling into some bad habits, and I said, look, we need to implement safety days again. I think we did it for 2 weeks, got things smooth, and we've done it since as well. So it is this is the discipline part. We can gain insight through the experience of sharing. We can understand each other's stories, but to get to that place, we have to practice discipline. And so I really encourage couples, if you choose to do this, you will be successful. You will have to work at it. And then I tell them this as well. It is highly likely that you'll work real hard at this for a week and then sort of slip out of it, and then you'll remember it and you'll feel guilty and you won't go back and do it. And what you have to do is go back and keep working at it, because it does take time to develop new habits. I tell people it takes 90 days to develop a new habit. But if you work it, you will see constructive change. And as I've said, I have never seen it fail. When I can coach a couple into actually really doing it, and we teach this in our marriage workshops as well. We had a circumstance. One story comes to mind. We all this content we teach in workshops as well as in counseling. And we'd done a workshop in a church, and we're in the same environment a year later. And this couple comes and says, we did this last year with you, and we're kind of excited to re-practice and catch up, and it was really good for us. We're looking forward to this. Halfway through the session, she comes up and says, this seems really different. You've changed a lot, haven't you? And I said, no, we haven't changed anything. You've changed. And that was kind of touching. And then when we came to this part, she came up afterwards and said, when you started teaching that, I felt guilty because we hadn't been doing the every other day thing. But by the time we reached the end of it and we talked, we realized we'd been kind of doing that anyway. It was just, kind of part of what we had incorporated, kind of naturally. So they felt good about that. So this is, I do this last intentionally because they have to be good listeners. They have to trust me to guide them. I want them to already have had the success of romance builders, creating a nice positive environment, brainstorming, working together, so that they have the faith and the confidence and the courage to sit and deal with negative emotion. When this goes well, it's 20 minutes, no longer. It will take longer if the listener stops listening or asks questions in a way that gets the other person out of their emotional state. So there are ways to make it go longer or less effective. But as I've laid it out, it's really, really powerful. Really powerful. So at this point, we've covered certainly not everything we could have covered in marriage counseling, but we've covered what I've observed to be the essentials of making constructive change, even in very distressed relationships. And so we spend a little time reviewing all the elements. There's this repetitive thing. Romance builders, brainstorm, Eve, limiting anger, increasing positive, praying for each other. It's just those elements we just keep talking about. Every chance I get, I review. This is how you do it, how are you doing it, how's it going? So we do it again. We close out the session reviewing all of the elements. I will often go back and do the first marriage assessment. In the last one, there's almost always constructive change, but not everything's changed, almost always, in a short period of time. So maybe their communication's improved, maybe they're more parenting together better, but maybe they still have significant conflicts with money. Then we'll talk about how to apply these principles that we've just used to whatever else seems to need repair. So like if it was money, I'd say we need to do some brainstorms. And if that doesn't, and you really keep working to come up with a good budgetary solution, and if you find yourselves dealing with too much anger, frustration, or pain, you need to do a search for safety so that you can kind of uncover any underlying emotional stuff. So we use these things that I teach. That's the toolbox now. And so we may talk through how to apply these tools in the future. And of course, they always have the freedom to contact me again. I never really end a relationship. Um, but in fact, when we're doing intensives, they're with us for 3 or 4 days. We do all of this stuff in 4 sessions, and then I'm often coaching them for a year, depending on what goes on afterwards. Um, uh, I want to reinforce honesty with each other, speaking the truth to each other, and being real about are we really making progress or not. Not just pretending that everything's going well just because we've done this work together. I always set up some kind of follow-up. Sometimes it's just an email, just some, how you doing, how's it going, uh, and both to maintain relationships. So if they need to come back, they can. Um, but also just to, I like hearing that we're doing well, which is what is the story most of the time. Maybe not perfect, but we're doing well here and there. So I get a feel good out of that too. So that was my next slide is where we're going to go with this training. We got about 14 minutes left in the hour, and you all have in all of these sessions, you all have been super respectful. You've been great. Not all of you have heard all of these sessions. I realize that. So Mirabella can come back around and remind you all where they're at on YouTube. We're recording this one right now. It will be posted on YouTube with the others, a link from our website, and so on. So you can review those things, and as well as any of the materials that we use in the course of this sort of thing. Now, as you see, in this last session, I don't have any handouts. We just do it. It's the experience of doing it that teaches it. I do have a handout. I may print off for them just so they have the outline, the acronym, but that's really all there is to it. It's really very much the experience of what we've gone through. So I want to, we've covered a lot of material over these last 4 hours of training. Let me show you where we're headed, and that may craft any discussion you want to have with me. We're not going to meet in December. It's just Christmas in America is just wild, and so the third Thursday puts us right around the holiday. But in January we'll come back, and what I think I'll do, we did a training. The trainings we've done so far since we started the monthly training have to do with premarital and marriage mentoring, have to do with helping marriage disaster, and now the 4 sessions marriage. I thought I'd do at least one more on marriage in a sequence and take you through the outline. It's using all the tools I just taught, but how it's different when adultery is involved. I try to avoid the word affair. I think it's too soft a word, so I try to remember to use the word adultery recovery. And so that's my plan for January. So the third Thursday of January, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, I'll be taking us through how to take these elements and apply them to adultery recovery. And it is a little different how you use the tools, because you have to attend to the issues of betrayal and trust and fear in a much more profound way, and anger, much more profound way when you're dealing with something that has totally destroyed the marriage. So we'll do that in January. Now the rest is tentative. I have some people I'd like to expose you to who are experts in certain things. So I thought at least one session on trauma next year, talking about how it affects people, what we do to help people. Many of you work in environments where people have experienced some kind of trauma. And we're likely to have some leaders from Africa joining us next year who are leading in war-torn areas, and so I think it'll be relevant in that way. And along with trauma and neglect comes, in March or sometime thereafter, attachment issues. As it turns out, many of our partners in Romania are also involved in ministries to orphans or orphanages or families who have multiple children of different parentage in their home. And the research and the understanding of what causes problems with attachment is really getting good. And in fact, there's an international conference that I'm going to try to see if we can set up to be hosted in Romania at some site. Eden will be participating. We'll be participating in it here. It's really a big deal, and it's really, really powerful. But our expert, Sarah Camindo, I think we'll have her talk a little bit about things that take place that affect attachment and so forth. And then I'm open. There are lots of things we could talk about. I've kind of stayed with the marriage theme because there was some interest in that. We've had, a number of you here regularly. But in the survey that goes out right after this, so there'll be a survey coming to your email. If you would fill that out and attend to, I think there's a place in there for you to tell us what you'd be interested in. And we have the capacity to address really a lot of issues in terms of relationship, mental health, group dynamics, leadership, a variety of different things. Another thing I was thinking of having Bob Groves come and talk to us about organization. Bob is really good at coaching on things like time management and organization and prioritizing. So there's just a lot of things we could do. I have some really competent friends that also speak well. So in the last few minutes here, I'd like to open the chat room up. So if you have a chat feature, and so when you click on that, you can write things. For example, some of you had said, I've already used it. You've said hello. I haven't. I'm just opening it for the first time, so I can write hello. I send it, and all of you should see hello from me. And so if you have a question, we do have a few minutes. So if all these elements, if you wanted me to expand or clarify, I can do that in the next few minutes. So if any of you would like a little more content or a little more something, take right now, just put it in the chat there, and I'll just respond to it. I'll be happy to do that. You've all been extremely respectful. Mirabella tells me that in a Romanian lecture context, it is not common for Romanians to ask questions or insert themselves into the flow of things. So I'm inviting you to do something American, which is in an American group, there's always somebody eager to talk, raise their hand, and so I'm inviting you to do that. No one is responding right now, and that's fine too. I mean, that's not a problem at all. We will resume in January. I had one more slide. So feel free to throw a chat in there. I'm leaving it open, and I'll see it if it comes. We are nailing down our plans to come to Romania again, and we're targeting the end of June, first part of July, to accommodate a young woman, a teenager, and her father, who she's interested in helping us develop short-term mission in a more conventional way. You all probably are familiar with Americans going someplace, painting something, building something. We have some projects we're looking at. And so to accommodate, her school ends mid-June, so we'll be coming during that window of time. It'll give me a chance to experience late spring, early summer in Romania. I've been there in the fall and the early spring, and so I'm sort of looking forward to that. So we are willing and open to, I hope I've spelled those names right, we kind of have developed a pattern of spending some time in Brasov. We went to Yaj last year, had a great time, contemplating going back there. In fact, it was in Yaj that we actually addressed an orphanage, and that sort of led me to thinking about actually bringing Sarah with us. That's what those of you that are interested in this, I'm praying that Sarah will want to come. She wants to, can work it out to come, and her teaching would be incredible for those of you that are doing mission to either orphanages or orphans or planning these things. Really, really powerful. Our friends in Timișoara, Liviu says yes. Look forward to have you back. Darius says Timișoara, good. And then we have friends in Bucharest that we are considering doing some training at. So most of the mission again will be kind of training, continuing to build our friendship, supporting in any way we can, and thank you, Lydia. She's responding as well. But maybe adding some content with some other of our people that are really, 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 really talented. So we'll be talking more about this, but we're going to be setting the date soon because we have to get tickets and that sort of thing. So Mirabella will be coordinating communication about how we will go about setting up an itinerary for that. So we're real excited about it. It'll be my 4 years in a row that I will have come to Romania. So I think I'm not seeing any questions. I appreciate your expressions of welcome as we look forward. Thank you for that. This is, I love you all. Some of you I really don't know. I know some of you, I'm getting to know some of you very well, others less so, but I'm looking forward to continuing to build relationship, either through these experiences or face-to-face, those of you that are out of country. And I'm always glad to see my local friends on there as well. So we'll in America, we're going into Thanksgiving week next week, which is another week when everything shuts down. Nobody does anything. It's all family and stuff. And I'm real excited about what's happening. We have family that have sort of distanced themselves. They don't really identify with the faith, and much of my family is really strong in the faith, and they think they will come and join us this year. And I'm really praying that they do that. And so it could be a real special reunion for many of our family, and something to be really grateful for, if this does come to be. So for those of you Americans, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and and however you guys do anything like that in Romania, the same. And we'll be doing this again then the third week in January. Mirabella will be sending out invitations. Do fill out the surveys; they really help us craft these things, and we'll look forward to just continuing our adventures together. So I'd like to close in prayer now, and we'll end our training here at this time. So Father in heaven, I'm grateful for time that we can take to just, teach and learn and share ideas, and hopefully stimulate some creative thinking about how to better serve those that you have come put in our path. I pray that these elements that we're teaching here affect us both personally, so we continue to be highly motivated to craft marriages that reflect your character, to where we are two people that stand against all of the wiles of Satan and all of the fleshly things that compete for our attention. Help us to focus on you, to enjoy all the elements that you've given us in marriage, the agape, the phileo, the eros, the position that we have as family, and to have confidence in that as your children. And so whatever's going on in the lives of the people who are listening right now, God, touch their homes, touch their lives, give them physical health, give them success as they move forward. And since we're all living great adventures, help us to be willing to do battle at times, and to stick together, and to overcome those things that are either painful or seem disparaging or discouraging. And help us to stay focused on the great reward that we have in you, and to just keep moving forward. So I'm so grateful for what you provide for us in being our God and Creator and Savior and source of our identity. So thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to further time of connection and communication. So we thank you and ask that you bless everyone present in Jesus' name. Amen. So thank you all for participating. Looking forward to further communication. God bless. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting out, and you all have a great week. And I'll give you a minute to say thanks for posting the comments and the response. So God bless. I'm going to close the meeting at this time.